Hello everyone, welcome back to part 2 in our series on seed starting. Today we're actually going to start some seeds, and so the first thing you're going to need is something to put your seedlings in. So these trays are readily available. They're the 21 by 11 inch, and they fit these seed starting cells that you can get. I bought these on Amazon. You can get all different sizes, as I'll show you. This is kind of the standard size where you get 12 rows of 6, so 72 individual cells, which is quite a few. I mean, 72 plants is a lot of plants. And then it comes with typically a little greenhouse lid that you can put on, and you can adjust that to make it more or less sealed. And so that's kind of your seed starting setup in terms of the hardware, if you will. Now they do have peat pots. I've tried those before, but I don't really like those because they tend to dry the seedlings out, and I just don't really like them. These are reusable also. The other ones you might see are these 4 size, so there's 4 instead of 6. Those are good for tomatoes, so things that are larger, like tomatoes, are going to get big pretty quickly, and so this will give them a little bit more room to grow. The second thing you're going to need is some seed starting mix. I use the Jiffy organic seed starting mix. Basically, it's just peat moss. I don't know if there's anything else in there. It's pretty much just peat moss that's moistened slightly. One thing you'll notice in this video too is sometimes it's a little more moist than others. The thing about I would always get the Jiffy mix if you just buy peat moss and try to save money that way. A lot of times peat moss is not moist at all when you buy it, and it can be really difficult to moisten it. So it can be really hygroscopic. You try to put water in it, it just runs off. So this stuff is kind of pre-moistened, which saves you a lot of time and energy. So what I do is I just pour it on right over the top and just sort of smooth it out. It doesn't have to be perfect. You just want to get some soil in there because you're going to end up covering the seeds anyway. So this doesn't have to be, there's no science really to this. You just sort of smooth it around, get it all in there. I found that one bag will do about 2 trays, 2 standard size seed trays. So you can kind of plan that way. And, for most people, I would say 3 or 4 trays is going to be more than you'd ever need. Because remember, you don't have to start everything. There are certain things that are better just planted outside, like cucumbers that grow really fast. You plant them, 2 weeks later, you got a pretty good sized plant. Squash, any kind of cooking green like chard, collards, kale. Those things are better just planted directly outside. So you don't start those inside. You're really only going to want to start peppers, eggplants, tomatoes, maybe some herbs, maybe certain kinds of flowers, that kind of thing. But a vast majority of your garden really, and I'm talking about we're in Zone 5 in New York State, so even for us, most things are better just planted directly out if you can do it. Obviously, eggplants, tomatoes, peppers, that kind of thing, you need to do that. You need to do that ahead of time. So we've got them set up, and now it's time to actually start some seeds. So what I recommend doing is just sort of going in order like this. So we're going to start some peppers. And one thing you'll notice is this is from last year, these poblano peppers. Pepper seeds will last a good 5 years minimum. And so you don't have to get rid of your old seeds. These are ones I used last year, and they'll be perfectly fine this year as well, and many more years to come. I'll use them up before they'd ever go bad. So what I do is I like to put 2 per cell. Now you can put more, but the thing is, as you'll see in our third video, the more seeds you put, the more thinning you have to do, because if your goal is to get 1 plant per cell, and so if you put 5 or 6 seeds in there, you're going to end up with probably 5 or 6 plants, and you'll end up having to pull 4 out of the 5, which is no fun to do, and also sort of a waste of resources. So I put 2 per cell, and that way you've got a good chance. If one doesn't germinate, the other will. Chances are pretty good they'll both germinate, but that's a good rule of thumb. You can always go a little heavier if you want to, but again, you're going to be pulling a lot of seedlings, so I speak from experience on that. I used to put 5 or 6 per cell and end up just pulling a lot of plants. And the other thing is you really only want 1 plant per cell because they'll compete with each other for nutrients, water, and they just won't grow as well. So what I do is put them in there and then just sort of push them into the soil with my finger. It doesn't have to be scientific. You don't have to worry too much about exactly where they are in the cell. Try to get them in the center, obviously, rather than at the edges. And then just sort of cover them up with a little bit more potting mix. Or sorry, seed starting mix, not potting mix. The same stuff you use to fill the trays with. That's a little bit darker looking, just the other bag was a little more moist for whatever reason. And then stick your label in there so that you know not to put your other seeds, because sometimes if you're doing this, you might wonder, wait, where did I put my seeds and where haven't I put seeds yet? So by labeling it and kind of going methodically like that, you'll avoid that problem of seeding it twice with two different kinds of peppers or tomatoes or whatever it might be. So we'll do another one here, Jimmy Nardello. This is a great sweet pepper. I made a video on that recently from last year's garden. So if you're looking for a really sweet, all-purpose pepper, Jimmy Nardello, and very productive, is a great pepper. So we're going to do the same thing. And again, you would do the same thing with tomatoes. And look how many seeds you get in a packet. That's why I say if you save your seed packets, these will be good for many, many years. I just used up my old ones last year that were 3 or 4 years old, and they worked fine. So I had to order some new ones. But you get a lot, way more than you'd ever use in any given season, most likely. So we'll do the same thing. We'll put 2 per cell. It can be a little tough. Now, pepper seeds are easier to work with. Some tomato seeds can be really, really small. Herb seeds like basil and things like that are even smaller, and so those you might have to kind of sprinkle and work with. But for tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, they're pretty easy. Take your time, put them in there. If you accidentally put 3, it's not a big deal. I think that the biggest message is not to worry too much about every little detail. Sometimes if you're just starting off, it can maybe seem overwhelming and you're worried about, will it work if this happens or that happens? Pretty much they're going to come up no matter what. So it's just going to be an issue of how quickly they do and then how many you have to thin. So if you put seeds in the dirt, they're going to come up one way or the other. So don't stress about it. But by doing this, you're going to save yourself some work later. I used to put 5 or 6 in every cell because I thought, well, I really want to make sure they come up. Oh, they will. And then you'll end up with a lot of extra plants that way. So, and it's always hard to thin, as we'll talk about in the next video. So here they are. Here's this tray once it's all seeded, covered up. And now the next thing you're going to want to do is water them in. So we'll show that. So now we're up on the shelf here, and we're going to just water them in. And what I like to do for the initial watering is use a mister. Advantages of a mister are, there's a few advantages. One, when you're first doing this, you're going to see that the seed starting mix is very dry. So if you were to just pour water over it, there's a good chance, rather than soaking through, it's going to kind of run over, and then it will carry some of the seeds into the cells next door, and so you're going to have your seeds all over the place, not where you wanted to put them. So by doing this kind of sets it in a sense. It gets wet, it gets packed down, and it sets everything in place. From here on out, next time you water, you can use just a little watering can or like a cup or something like that, and that works totally fine. Then I just like to put the greenhouse lid over it. What that does is keep all the moisture in there. While they're germinating, you want them moist and warm. So here's a look inside. Everything's all set up. They've got their lid. The better lids, I have some like this and some are just plain, have that adjustment there so that you can make them more or less humid inside. I keep it completely closed until they're germinated. And then I have a heat mat, which I talked about in the setup video, but the heat mat is really going to help with your peppers and things like that. Tomatoes aren't going to need it, but peppers really do need a heat mat, peppers and eggplants to get going. They'll still come up. I mean, if you plant them without a heat mat, they're going to come up. It just might take a few weeks versus a few days, so it makes a huge difference. Now, it's important to note that you're only going to want that heat mat and that greenhouse lid until the plants are sprouted. Once the plants sprout, those do more harm than good. So we'll talk about that down the road, but you want to take those things off once you have small plants so that they don't get too humid in there and get fungal issues. So here's our setup. We have everything all planted. We've got the 4 lids on. The only things on the actual heat mat are the peppers, as you can see in here. A little look inside. peppers on the top and bottom, and then a couple of herbs that just happen to be mixed in with the peppers, so they're getting the benefit of the heat mat as well. The basil and cilantro don't have the heat mat. They don't need it, nor do the tomatoes. They'll come up in just a few days. So this is Saturday as I'm recording this, Saturday. So this is Thursday evening, so this is just 5 or 6 days later, so not even a week since we sowed the seeds. And as you can see, they're already popping up. We have a whole bunch of fenugreek here. We have all the tomatoes are up. In fact, they're going to need to be thinned, which is perfect for our next video. You can see what happens if you put too many seeds in, which I obviously did in this one. That's far too many, because what's going to happen is they'll compete with each other for light and for nutrients. And 3 in one cell is not better than 1. It's actually 3 times worse in a way, because if you have 1 in one cell, the plant will be healthier, bigger, stronger. But if there's 3, all 3 will be sickly. So you don't want that. So if we look a little bit again here, again our tomatoes, I always like to brush them like that. You can put a fan too. The point of that is you're kind of toughening them up a little bit. When they're outside, their wind is going to be blowing on them, and they're going to develop a little bit of strength in their stems. Inside, you don't have any wind, of course, unless you have your windows open and there's breeze blowing in or something. So I just brush them a little bit every day, and that kind of simulates the same thing. Let's take a look inside here. This is Thursday again. You can see, or this is Friday, sorry. You can see there's a number of peppers already coming up, so not even a week. So we started these Saturday last week. It's Friday night as we're looking at this, and you can see there's peppers popping up all over the place. So it doesn't take long with that heating mat. Now I will leave the greenhouse lid on for another day or 2 maximum here on these peppers. The tomatoes are already out of the greenhouse, because if you leave it on too long, they're going to be far too moist, and you can get a lot of what's called dampening off, which is a fungal disease, and you don't want that. So as soon as the plants are sprouted, you don't need the heating mat, which will dry out the roots if you leave it in, and you also don't need the greenhouse, which will keep them far too moist. And so as soon as you have sprouts, now you just have little plants, and it's about keeping those and caring for those and growing them into small plants that you'll then transplant. So thank you for watching. I hope you found this video helpful and informative, and I think the biggest message is when you're just starting out with seed starting, don't let all the things, all the components of it stress you out. It's going to work one way or the other, but if you follow these steps, you should definitely have success.